The body's answer when the brain has not caught up yet. There is a physiological response that every combat and trauma specialist who has ever studied law enforcement encounters describes in essentially the same terms. The body moves before the conscious mind has time to form an instruction. A sergeant steps out of his patrol SUV into the end of a multi-county chase, and before the word danger has assembled itself in his brain, a bullet has already passed through his hand and his attacker is already trying to get into his car. A Greenville officer is sitting in a marked cruiser outside the county law enforcement center at 2 in the morning, and in the time it takes to register what is happening, incendiary rounds, a type of ammunition specifically engineered to cause maximum damage, are tearing through the driver's side door and igniting against the window frame. 3 officers in a Colorado city are searching a residential neighborhood for a man with an attempted homicide warrant, and within 8 seconds of the first sighting, 27 rifle rounds have already been fired at their patrol vehicles, and one of their colleagues is incapacitated on the ground. And a deputy is stringing crime scene tape at a shooting location in South Florida, not even facing the street, when a black SUV leaves a roadway going approximately 50 miles per hour and drives directly into him. In all 4 of those situations, survival was not a strategy. It was a biological event, a set of decisions made by a nervous system that had trained for years for this moment and was now executing what training had built without waiting for permission. Today's 4 cases are all from the most recent 14 months of law enforcement encounters on record. 2 of them happened in January 2026. 1 happened in March 2025. 1 happened in February 2026. Less than 3 weeks before this episode was recorded. They are the freshest cases this channel has ever covered, and they are covered today because the footage exists, the official statement have been released, and the facts have been verified through law enforcement press conferences, department-released bodycam and dashcam footage, district attorney reviews, and documented news reporting from the outlets that were on the ground in each city. What makes these 4 cases different from the standard officer in danger narrative is a specific type of extreme situation each one represents. They are not the same situation. They are 4 completely different categories of immediate mortal danger, and the category matters because the category determines what survival looks like. In California, survival looked like a 13-year department veteran continuing to pursue and return fire after being shot in both his hand and his head. In South Carolina, survival looked like getting out of a car door on the side away from where the bullets were coming from, and doing it fast enough to matter. In Colorado, survival looked like multiple officers keeping each other from dying across 3 separate ambush locations over the course of 1 hour, aided by an Army veteran who happened to be standing in a backyard. In Florida, survival looked like a deputy who had just been hit by a vehicle going 50 miles an hour, knocked 40 feet through the air, and landed on the pavement with a compound ankle fracture, getting his service weapon out and firing before the man who had just run him over could close the remaining 5 feet between them on foot. All 4 of today's cases are fully verified. All 4 have documented law enforcement official statements, bodycam or surveillance footage released publicly, and district attorney or investigative reviews where applicable. The suspect in 3 of the 4 cases are deceased. The 4th is in custody and charged. The officers in all 4 cases survived. 3 of the 4 were hospitalized. All of them came home. Before the first case, I want you to track something through all 4 of today's situations. Not the danger itself, but the moment just before the officer acts. The specific heartbeat between the moment the threat materializes and the moment the officer responds. That interval is where training and instinct and luck collide, and it is different in every one of these 4 cases. Tell me in the comments which of today's 4 you think had the smallest margin between survival and something else, and why. Shot in the hand. Shot in the head. Still moving. Downtown San Jose, California, January 21st, 2026. Wednesday afternoon, January 21st, 2026. 2:01 p.m. The intersection of Notre Dame Avenue and West Julian Street in downtown San Jose, California, a block from the Highway 87 underpass. Sergeant Gerardo Silva, a 13-year veteran of the San Jose Police Department, is driving hard toward the terminal point of a multi-agency, multi-county pursuit. The suspect at the center of that pursuit is 30-year-old Mohammed Hussein, a resident of Davis, California, who has spent the past 5 days committing a crime spree across Northern California that reads like a case brief for a police academy. Armed carjacking at gunpoint from a Sacramento dealership on January 17th, multiple armed robberies across the Bay Area, a stolen green Corvette, a second Corvette stolen from a San Jose dealership at gunpoint, a high-speed chase south to Hollister, a shootout with Hollister police and San Benito County Sheriff's deputies, a third vehicle carjacked in Hollister, and then shots fired at California Highway Patrol officers during the return pursuit northbound towards San Jose. The pursuit ends at Notre Dame in Julian. Silva drives fast to the terminal point. He nearly hits Hoosian as the suspect exits the stolen white Honda sedan into the road. Silva stops his SUV. He gets out. His weapon is drawn. And then the shooting starts. The Bodycam and helicopter footage released publicly by the San Jose Police Department on March 1, 2026, distributed ahead of the state-mandated 4 to 5 day public disclosure deadline for officer-involved shootings, documents what happened in the seconds that followed. The footage is narrated by SJPD officer Tanya Hernandez, speaking over the edited release. Within moments of Silva exiting his patrol SUV, Hoosian shoots him in the hand. The blood is visible on Silva's sleeve in the footage immediately after impact. Silva attempts to gain control of his weapon despite the wound and returns fire. Then the second round strikes him in the head, fracturing his skull. Despite 2 gunshot wounds, one in the hand, one in the skull, the bodycam footage shows Silva continuing to move, continuing to pursue Hoosian on foot toward the Highway 87 underpass, continuing to fire. The San Jose Police Department Chief Paul Joseph would later describe the incident as harrowing. The footage supports that word. The suspect tried to take his car. After being shot in the hand and the head, Silva was still moving forward. What Hoosian did next is captured on helicopter footage. The suspect tried to carjack Silva's patrol vehicle. He could not get in. He turned and fled on foot toward the Highway 87 underpass. At this point, 9 other officers and sergeants from the San Jose Police Department were converging on the scene. Officers opened fire as Hoosian ran. He fell to the ground. A second sergeant, whose name had not been publicly released at the time of this episode, drove his patrol SUV toward Hoosian as the suspect lay in the road and ran him over. According to Officer Hernandez's narration in the video presentation, the collision dislodged Hoosian's firearm, a 9mm handgun equipped with a 33-round extended magazine, from his hand, sending it into an embankment. Despite being shot multiple times and struck by the vehicle, Hoosian continued to move. Officers who still believed he was armed fired again. He was pronounced deceased at the scene. Silva's colleagues recognized immediately that he was seriously injured. On the bodycam audio, the moment after he staggers toward the other officers who are now converging on the underpass, the call that goes up is "Hospital! Hospital! Let us go!" Silva was evacuated to the hospital not in an ambulance, but in the back of a patrol car, driven by fellow officers who were not waiting for EMS in a situation where waiting was not an option. He underwent surgery for the skull fracture. He was released from the hospital the following day. 3 sergeants and 6 officers total were involved in the use of force during this incident. Their combined experience at the San Jose Police Department ranged from 4 to 19 years. None of them were killed. The investigation and what Hoosian had done. The San Jose Police Department released a 17-minute video presentation on March 1st that included footage from Bodycam's dash cams and the SJPD helicopter, along with a detailed narration of the events leading up to and during the encounter. The presentation documented Hoosian's 5-day crime spree in specific detail: the January 17 Corvette theft at gunpoint in Sacramento, the armed robberies across the Bay Area, the January 21st second Corvette carjacking at gunpoint from a San Jose dealership, the Hollister shootout, the third carjacking, the shots fired at CHP during the return pursuit. SJPD detectives also arrested an accomplice, Edward Macias, on January 22nd, the day after the terminal confrontation. Hoosian was, according to the SJPD official release, a convicted felon, which means a 9mm handgun with the extended 33-round magazine he carried that afternoon was a weapon he was not legally permitted to possess. The Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office opened an independent review of the officer's use of force, as California law requires. San Jose Mayor Matt Mahan visited Silva in the hospital and told reporters afterward, "I went and visited Sergeant Silva as he was recovering in the hospital. I expressed my sincere gratitude to him and got to meet his parents. After watching the video, my sense of gratitude is even greater." Police Chief Paul Joseph said in his message at the start of the department's video release, "Every officer involved in yesterday's harrowing incident will carry the heaviness of what happened for the rest of their lives." A 13-year veteran was shot in the hand and then in the head at a traffic intersection at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. He kept moving. He kept firing. His colleagues drove him to the hospital in a patrol car because there was no time for an ambulance. He was released the next day. The suspect had shot at or exchanged fire with officers from at least 4 separate agencies over 5 days. He was a convicted felon with an illegal weapon. He tried to carjack the wounded sergeant's own vehicle. What does the phrase keeping the public safe actually mean on days like January 21st, 2026? Tell me in the comments. 5-day crime spree across Northern California. A carjacked Corvette. Shootouts in Hollister. Shots at CHP on the freeway. The end of the chase at Notre Dame in Julian. A sergeant who got out of his SUV and was shot in the hand before he could complete a thought. Shot in the head while returning fire. Blood on his sleeve on the Bodycam. His colleagues yelling, "Hospital, hospital, let us go." Surgery for skull fracture. Released the next day. The suspect tried to take his car. He could not. The helicopter captured all of it. The chief said every officer involved will carry the heaviness of what happened for the rest of their lives. The mayor met his parents at the hospital. He said his sense of gratitude was even greater after watching the video. The prior warning and the unanswered question. Lane had told someone at his apartment complex that he planned to shoot up the sheriff's office. Complaints had been filed on January the 1st and 2nd. Deputies had responded. They had determined the behavior was concerning but did not warrant arrest. The apartment complex had hired off-duty deputies as additional security beginning January 8th. And on January 11th, Lane drove to the LEC parking lot with a shotgun loaded with Dragon's Breath ammunition and fired it into the side of a parked police cruiser. The gap between the documented complaints and the attack on Officer Alberto is a question that the ongoing SLED investigation will eventually address. The GCSO Office of Professional Standards reviewed deputies' use of deadly force in the chase and determined it was justifiable. The broader question of what was known, when, and what could have been done with it is one that every ambush case of this type eventually produces. Gio Alberto escaped through the passenger side door. He was home the same day. He went to the State of the Union. Lane had told someone he was going to shoot up the sheriff's office. Neighbors filed complaints on January 1st and January 2nd. Deputies investigated and determined the threshold for arrest was not met. The apartment hired private security beginning January 8th. 11 days after the first complaints, Lane parked next to a marked police cruiser at the County Law Enforcement Center and opened fire with incendiary ammunition. Alberto escaped through the passenger door. The same question that appears in every case like this one. At what point does a threat that does not yet meet the legal threshold for arrest become a situation that law enforcement is legally and morally obligated to act on differently? Tell me in the comments. January 11th, 2026, 1:49 a.m. The County Law Enforcement Center parking lot. A 12-gauge shotgun. Dragon's Breath ammunition. Multiple rounds through the driver's side door. Sparks arcing into the darkness on surveillance video. Large burnt holes in the door and mirror. Alberto out through the passenger side. Neighbors had filed complaints 11 days earlier. He had told them he was going to shoot up the sheriff's office. Deputies investigated and determined the threshold for arrest was not met. The apartment hired off-duty security on January 8th. On January 11th, he drove to the parking lot. The chase ended with Lane dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound at 4:30 a.m. Alberto was released from the hospital the same day. He was at the State of the Union 6 weeks later. He was smiling and enthusiastic. Senator Scott said he was motivating. 27 rounds in 8 seconds. 3 officers down. Pueblo, Colorado, March 18, 2025. Tuesday evening, March 18, 2025. 7:12 p.m. The area of West Mesa Avenue and Cedar Street in the Bessemer neighborhood of Pueblo, Colorado. 2 Pueblo Police Department officers are responding to information from a bond agent, not from a 911 call, not from a crime in progress, but from a tip by a bail bondsman that a person on their watch list has been seen in the area attempting to steal a motorcycle. The person is identified as Billy Soto, 34 years old, a man with 14 prior felony arrests who is currently out on bond for 3 separate open felony cases. Soto is on the FBI Southern Colorado Safe Streets Task Force's wanted list because of an outstanding attempted homicide warrant. The 2 officers arrive in their patrol cruisers at the intersection of Mesa Avenue and Cedar Street. Before they are fully parked, Soto walks past them on the sidewalk. He is carrying a rifle. He immediately opens fire. The dashcam footage released by the Pueblo Police Department on November 13, 2025, more than 7 months after the incident, documents the opening seconds of what will become a 1-hour, 3-location, 80-round running battle through a residential neighborhood. In those first seconds at Mesa and Cedar, Soto fires 27 rounds at the 2 parked patrol vehicles in 8 seconds, according to the department official accounting. 1 officer is struck in the head. He is incapacitated at the scene. He does not return fire. The 2nd officer begins rendering aid to the 1st. Soto flees on foot into the surrounding neighborhood. The radio call goes out, officer down. The Army veteran in the backyard. Officers from the Pueblo Police Department and the Pueblo County Sheriff's Office flooded into the Bessemer neighborhood from every available direction after the officer down radio call. They established a perimeter. They set up an incident command post. They called for a drone to assist in locating Soto's position in the residential grid of streets and backyards. While all of this was being organized, one of the most important things that happened in this incident took place in the backyard near the first scene. The officer who had been incapacitated by the headshot was on the ground, and his partner was rendering aid when a bystander, an Army veteran, noticed what was happening and came over. The veteran assisted in rendering first aid to the wounded officer, and according to the district attorney's review of the incident, his assistance was significant enough that the DA's report specifically names his actions as allowing the 2nd officer to communicate details to dispatch while the veteran helped stabilize the 1st. He stepped into a live crime scene to help a stranger he knew was a police officer, and his training from his military service was a reason he was able to do it. The search for Soto continued. Approximately 40 minutes after the first ambush, a group of officers from the PPD and the PCSO were working to open what appeared to be a backyard gate on Pine Street when shots fired from behind a wooden fence. The Bodycam footage shows the officers standing in front of the fence when a muzzle flash appears from behind it. A Pueblo Police Department sergeant was struck in the arm and the leg by the rounds fired through the fence. The other officers pulled the sergeant out of harm's way. A bystander in a nearby backyard called out that Soto had run through his yard. The search continued. The rooftop and the final exchange. Officers and deputies eventually located Billy Soto's position on the roof of a garage on Pine Street. From the rooftop, he opened fire into the alley below, where officers were moving. This time the person struck was a Pueblo Police Department captain, Gabe Maldonado, hit in the face and neck. At no point since the Mesa and Cedar opening ambush had any officer or deputy been in a position to return fire and connect. Soto was continuing to move, continuing to shoot, and continuing to stay ahead of the responding force in the residential terrain. The district attorney's eventual review describes a sequence. Soto unleashed a barrage of gunfire from a high-powered rifle at officers immediately upon seeing their patrol vehicles, and over approximately the next hour Soto attempted to flee from law enforcement while continuing to shoot. During this time, Soto shot and seriously injured 3 PPD officers and fired nearly 40 rifle rounds in a populated residential neighborhood. When officers were finally able to pin down Soto's position on the garage rooftop, 4 Pueblo Police Department officers and 4 Pueblo County Sheriff's deputies converged. They returned fire. Soto was fatally struck. He was declared deceased at the scene. Officers rendered medical aid before his death was confirmed. The 3 officers who had been shot, 1 in the head of the opening ambush, 1 in the arm and leg through the fence, 1 in the face and neck from the rooftop, were all transported to the hospital. All 3 had been released from the hospital by April 12, 2025. As of September 2025, 1 officer had returned to full duty. 2 were still recovering. Who Billy Soto was and what that means. The Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police wrote a letter to Governor Jared Polis and state lawmakers after the March 18th incident. The letter described the 2 most seriously injured officers as having been shot in the head. It said the suspect was out on bond in 3 separate felony cases despite 14 prior felony arrests. It said, "This represents a catastrophic failure of our pretrial system to protect both officers and the public from individuals with demonstrated patterns of dangerous behavior." Pueblo Police Chief Chris Noella said, in a statement that was widely distributed and widely quoted, "The blood of my officers lays at the steps of the Capitol." He was referencing state legislation he believed had weakened penalties for violent offenders and made it easier for people like Soto to remain in the community between arrests. Of Soto's 14 prior felony arrests, 10 charges had been dismissed and juries had acquitted him on 2 others. He was on bond for 3 active felony cases on March 18th and had an outstanding attempted homicide warrant. The Pueblo Police Department spokesperson Bianca Hicks said the officer's survival on March 18th came down to chance. She specifically said that slight changes in bullet trajectory could have resulted in fatalities. 3 separate ambushes. 80 rounds fired. 3 officers shot. 1 Army veteran in a backyard. And what the district attorney's review, released in September 2025, determined all officers and deputies were justified in their use of deadly force based on the threat Soto posed throughout the entire 1-hour engagement. 14 prior felony arrests. 10 charges dismissed. Acquitted on 2 others. Out on bond for 3 open felony cases. An outstanding attempted homicide warrant. A rifle. 3 officers shot across 3 separate ambush locations over 1 hour in a residential neighborhood. The survivors said survival came down to chance and slight changes in bullet trajectory. The department chief said the blood of his officers was on the steps of the Capitol. A bail bondsman's tip about a motorcycle theft was the reason 2 officers drove to Mesa Avenue. If that tip had not come in, the officers would not have been on that street, and Soto would still have been somewhere in Pueblo. What should the pre-trial release system look like for someone with Soto's history? Tell me in the comments. 7:12 p.m. Mesa Avenue and Cedar Street. A bail bondsman's tip about a motorcycle theft. A man with 14 prior felony arrests and 3 open felony cases on bail. 27 rifle rounds in 8 seconds before the officers were out of their cars. First officer shot in the head and incapacitated. An Army veteran in a backyard helping keep him alive. Second ambush through a wooden fence 40 minutes later. Third ambush from a garage rooftop. A sergeant shot in arm and leg. A captain shot in face and neck. Nearly 80 total rounds. 3 officers hospitalized. All survived by April. 1 in full duty by September. Soto killed by return fire on the rooftop. The chief said the blood of his officers was on the steps of the Capitol. The spokesperson said survival came down to chance. The Army veteran in the backyard came to help a stranger. 3 scenes processed. 8 officers and deputies involved in the final exchange. Hit at 50 miles per hour. On the ground. Gun out. Pahaki, Florida, February 25th, 2026. Wednesday night, February 25th, 2026. Between 10:12 and 10:54 p.m. Pahaki, Florida, a city of approximately 5,500 residents in Palm Beach County, along the western shore of Lake Okeechobee, about 50 miles west of West Palm Beach. In the span of 4 to 2 minutes, 4 to 4-year-old Charles Curtis McLeod Jr. visits 3 separate locations in the city and shoots 4 people. At the first location, 171 Booker Place, he shoots 2 men. Both are pronounced dead at the scene. At the second location, in the 8700 block of Doveland Drive, multiple shots are fired but no one is struck. At the third location, a convenience store at 750 Belle Glade Road, he shoots a 54-year-old man in a vehicle. That man is airlifted to the hospital. He will survive. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office deputies respond to the first shooting and begin securing the scenes. A deputy is at the second location on Doveland Drive, conducting a preliminary investigation, stringing crime scene tape around the perimeter. His back is likely to the road. He does not hear McLeod returning. He is hit by a black GMC sub that has left the roadway at speed and is driven directly and deliberately at him. He goes 40 feet through the air. Sheriff Rick Bradshaw described that sequence at a news conference on the morning of February 26 with a specificity of someone who had reviewed the footage and the witness accounts from the night before. "You have just been hit by a car that is going probably 50 miles an hour," Bradshaw said. "You go through the air 40 feet. You hit the ground. The guy is coming out with a gun to finish you off. And he had enough wherewithal to get his gun out and neutralize this guy." Bradshaw confirmed that McLeod was within approximately 5 feet of the deputy on the ground when the deputy fired and struck him. McLeod was killed at the scene. A second deputy who was also present fired during the confrontation but did not strike McLeod. The deputy who was hit by the vehicle was airlifted to St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach. His injuries, a compound fracture of his ankle, extensive bruising across his body, and what the sheriff described as injuries consistent with being hit by a vehicle and landing on pavement. Bradshaw said he was very, very lucky to be alive. What the sheriff said about who McLeod was. Charles Curtis McLeod Jr. had an extensive documented criminal history, confirmed by the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office in its official release. His prior charges included riot, resisting an officer with violence, armed robbery, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, felon in possession of a firearm, carrying a concealed weapon, narcotics equipment and possession, and escape or attempted escape from a county facility. The Sheriff's Office confirmed 19 prior arrests. He was a convicted felon at the time of the February 25th shootings, which means a 9mm Canic brand handgun he carried, the weapon he got out of the GMC cell with, the weapon he was walking toward the deputy on the ground with, was a weapon he was not legally permitted to have. Bradshaw said at the news conference, "This guy here, he is a career criminal. There is no way he should be out walking around." Bradshaw also addressed the motive. He said detectives were 99% positive McLeod was responsible for all 4 shootings that night, and that the investigation was attempting to establish what connection, if any, existed between McLeod and the 2 men he shot at Booker Place. The sheriff subsequently disclosed that McLeod had been upset about several men who were involved with his girlfriend, and that the crime spree appeared to be motivated by that anger. 2 men he shot at Booker Place died. A man at a convenience store he shot from a vehicle is alive, and a deputy putting up crime scene tape. A deputy who had no connection to anything McLeod was angry about, who was simply the nearest law enforcement officer in the nearest location, was driven into at 50 miles per hour by a man who then got out of the vehicle to finish the job. The phrase "finish the job" is not an editorial choice. It is what Bradshaw's description of the sequence establishes. McLeod exited the vehicle, armed, and moved toward the person he had just run over. That is a specific sequence of decisions made by someone who wanted the deputy dead. What the deputy did. The deputy's name had not been publicly released at the time this episode was recorded, which is standard PBSO protocol when a deputy-involved shooting investigation is pending review by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office, and the PBSO's own Violent Crimes Division, all 3 of which were simultaneously investigating the incident. What is publicly confirmed from the official release in the sheriff's on-record statements is a specific sequence: hit by a vehicle, 40 feet of travel through the air, compound ankle fracture, the attacker exiting the vehicle with a firearm and walking toward the deputy on the ground, the deputy, from the ground, drawing his service weapon, firing, McLeod struck, McLeod dead within 5 feet of the deputy. Bradshaw's word for it at the news conference was courage. He said, "What really kicked him was his courage and his will to survive and not let this guy get out of the car with a gun and shoot him on the ground. That was what the guy's intent was." So yeah, he showed a lot of courage and a lot of stamina. His training kicked in. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the State Attorney's Office, and the Violent Crimes Division are all reviewing. The deputy was placed on administrative leave, which is standard protocol. He is recovering from the compound ankle fracture and the additional injuries. His name will eventually become part of the public record when the investigation formally concludes. He is the officer who was hit by a vehicle going 50 miles per hour, traveled 40 feet through the air, hit the pavement with a compound ankle fracture, watched a man with a gun get out of the car and walk toward him with murder as a stated intent, and still shot first. 19 prior arrests. 19 prior arrests for a man carrying a gun he could not legally possess, committing a killing spree that left 2 men dead before he drove into a deputy stringing crime scene tape. The same accounting that applied to Billy Soto's 14 prior arrests in Pueblo applies here in Pahiki, a documented pattern of violent criminal behavior, a prior conviction that created a legal bar to firearm possession, and yet a firearm present in the encounter. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office did not release details of the prior cases that resulted in convictions, but the weapons charges in the prior arrest record, felon in possession, carrying a concealed weapon, represent prior occasions on which McLeod had been stopped while carrying. The gun was there on February 25th. The deputy who was hit by the vehicle was put in a position where his life depended on a half-second faster reaction than the man walking toward him. He was faster. He is in recovery. He will not have a name in the public record until the investigation is complete. But Bradshaw said he was lucky to be alive, and then said he showed a lot of courage and a lot of stamina. Both things are true. A deputy was stringing crime scene tape at a secondary shooting location when a man in an SUV left the road and drove directly into him at 50 miles per hour. The deputy was 40 feet from where he started. He had a compound ankle fracture. The man who had just run him over was walking toward him with a gun. He fired first. The man had 19 prior arrests, including felon in possession of a firearm. He was a convicted felon carrying a 9mm handgun. He had already killed 2 people that night. He told the deputy's SUV he was coming to finish what the vehicle had started, and the deputy on the ground with a broken ankle did not let him. How should the law treat someone with 19 prior arrests and a documented history of weapons offenses who then kills 2 people and attempts to murder a law enforcement officer? Tell me in the comments. February 25th, 2026. Pahaki, Florida. 4 to 2 minutes. 4 shooting locations. 2 men dead. 1 man shot at a convenience store. A deputy stringing crime scene tape. A black GMC leaving the road at 50 miles per hour. 40 feet through the air. Compound ankle fracture. McCloud out of the car with a 9mm handgun. Walking toward the deputy. 5 feet away. The deputy on the ground. The deputy's weapon out. The deputy's weapon fired. McCloud dead. 19 prior arrests. Felon in possession. The sheriff said he was a career criminal with no business out walking around. The deputy is in recovery. His training kicked in. His courage kicked in. His name is not yet public. He is alive because he was foster. What 14 months looks like. 4 cases. 14 months. 4 different states. 4 completely different categories of survival. All of them documented on camera. All of them verified. All of them representing a situation in which the margin between what happened and what could have happened was so small that the word close call feel insufficient. Sergeant Gerardo Silva was shot in both his hand and his head and came home the next day. Officer Gio Alberto was hit with incendiary ammunition in a police department parking lot and was released from the hospital the same morning. 3 Pueblo officers were ambushed with a rifle across 3 separate locations in 1 hour in a residential neighborhood, and all 3 eventually came home. An unnamed deputy in Payaqui was driven into at 50 miles per hour and then shot the man who tried to finish the job while lying on the pavement with a compound ankle fracture. The theme that runs through all 4 cases, and the theme that connects them to the broader pattern of what law enforcement in the United States is dealing with in 2025 and 2026, is not heroism in the cinematic sense. It is not the version of the story where the right thing happens at the right moment because the right person was there. It is a version where survival is a result of a combination of training, reflex, positioning, the specific trajectory of a specific bullet, the presence of an Army veteran who happened to be in the backyard, a passenger side door that was reachable fast enough, and a deputy's hand finding a weapon before a man's foot covered 5 feet of pavement. 3 of the 4 suspects in today's cases had criminal histories that included prior arrests for weapons charges, prior felony convictions that made it illegal for them to possess the firearms they used, and prior encounters with the legal system that had not produced outcomes that kept them away from law enforcement personnel. Billy Soto had 14 prior felony arrests and was out on bond for 3 active felony cases. Charles McCloud had 19 prior arrests and a prior felony conviction. Mohammed Houzian was a convicted felon with an illegal weapon. David Lane had made specific verbal threats that reached law enforcement and did not meet the legal threshold for arrest. In every one of today's 4 cases, the officers survived. In none of today's 4 cases was a system that was supposed to prevent the encounter, the pretrial detention process, the felony prohibition on firearms, the threat assessment that receives complaints about someone with a gun at an apartment complex sufficient to make the encounter not happen. The system produced the bodycam footage, the investigations, the official statements, and the determinations that all users of force were justified. It did not produce a world in which Silva was not shot in the head, or Alberto was not targeted with incendiary ammunition, or 3 officers in Pueblo were not hospitalized across 3 separate ambush points in a single hour, or a deputy in Paqui was not knocked 40 feet through the air. The officers survived those worlds and came back from them. The camera recorded all of it. Tell me in the comments which of today's 4 cases you think had the smallest margin. The fraction of an inch, the half second, the specific angle of a bullet trajectory, the passenger side door, the Army veteran in the backyard, the reflex on the ground with a broken ankle. Which one do you think came closest? New episode coming. See you in the next one.